Welcome to SSI Meetup. Today we will have our second review of the Internet Identity Workshop. This was a great idea that Drummond Reed had like 6 months ago, where we did our first one. As you know, Internet Identity Workshop takes place twice a year, and last week we had the second one of the year, and Drummond will be presenting today the highlights of what happened this year, at least from his perspective. He will share a little bit how it's really difficult to give a full picture of everything that is happening there. But let us quickly review what SSI Meetup is about in the next slide. Basically, what we're trying to achieve at SSI Meetup is to empower global SSI communities. And this is open to everyone. If you're a person, a company, or anyone interested in what is happening in the SSI space, this is the place for you to check it out. All the content being shared here is with the Creative Commons by Share Alike license, which basically means you can reuse it in whatever way you want. You just need to give credit back to the person that created it, which today is Drummond. And please also give credit back to SSI Meetup. If this is the first time that you're joining us, you will see that we did plenty of programs with some of the superstars of the SSI world as Drummond, and so you can review all this material. You get the Google Slides, you get the video, and you can then hopefully also use that material to create local meetups where you can talk and share knowledge or build up SSI communities. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing here. And without further ado, Drummond, thank you so much for joining us again and for sharing everything that you're learning.
Sure, Alex. I'm very happy to do that. In case you're tuning in for the first time, just a little bit of background. I'm Evernym Chief Trust Officer, Sovrin Foundation. I'm one of the founding trustees, and I chair the Governance Framework Working Group there. At W3C, the new official DID working group, I'm one of the editors of the DID specification. But for this particular webinar, my primary qualification is I've been to all 29 Internet Identity Workshops, which is getting close to, I think this is 14 and a half years. So if you're new and wondering what is this thing, Internet Identity Workshop, here's a little background for you. First one, Berkeley, California, 2005, and at that it was concluded that was really where OpenID was born. And everyone said, you know, we need to do this, and we can't just do it once a year. So it was decided to do it every 6 months. And the team of Kalia Young, Identity Woman, Phil Windley, and Doc Searles have run it ever since, with a staff of folks that are just really quite incredible. You can go get the complete history and see notes and what they call proceedings, notes of every one of the sessions that took notes at internetidentityworkshop.com. And so highly recommend that. Now, this is an unusual conference. It runs for 3 days, but it's entirely open space. There is no preset agenda. It's entirely self-organized by the attendees. There are 5 hour-long slots each day, and they've had to expand it to 14 meeting rooms. But a lot also happens in formal discussions, hallway meetings, and the all-conference dinners that take place on both nights. So before I dive into these highlights, I'm going to give you the same caveats that I did 6 months ago when I did this for the first one of these. I am just one person with one perspective on this conference, and as I'm about to tell you, there were many people there. At most, I can get to 1, sometimes 2. I'll go to half of 2 sessions, but I generally miss a bunch of sessions due to other meetings. And I can only go to the sessions that I'm most involved in or interested in. So there could be whole swaths of what happened there that I'm missing here. So this is just one person's take, and I encourage you to talk to other attendees and get their sense of the highlights. This time around, I have 8 highlights for you, and I'm just going to dive right into it. If you do have an urgent question about one of these that I pop up, you can feel free to put it in the question list, and Alex will, if he thinks it's highly relevant, interrupt me. Otherwise, we'll do questions at the end. So let's just dive right into it. So my first highlight is just the evidence that we see of how real SSI is getting, because this was by far the largest IIW ever. 320 attendees for a conference that typically has 20% fewer than that. The largest opening circle we've ever seen. Very international conference, at least 25 countries. I stopped counting. We had many large companies attending, many small companies attending, universities, governments, consortia like GS1 were there, and many developers. Lots of folks. I'm going to be covering that. So it was really everyone remarked it was the most broadly represented IIW that we've had yet. Which meant that Heidi Navantusal, who actually introduces everyone and explains the rules of open space, she's a real pro at doing it. And here she had to basically explain it to about 150 new folks that had never been to IIW. And it still went off without a hitch. I was really worried that the open space process would start to break with that many people, but it was very smooth. There you see the cards and pens you use to write down the name of the session that you want to give, and they're all assembled on a wall dynamically into the 5 slots, and you have to make very hard choices about what to go to because you can never get to all of it. So next headline, SSI and OpenID, they're getting married. There's wonderful synergy finally happening there. So OpenID, if you're not familiar with, it is the leading internet scale federation protocol. As I said, it was initially essentially born at the first IIW and grew up through 3 generations over the ensuing decade. It's quite the mature open standard and has significant pockets of adoption. It is just a different identity model. Folks have seen my other presentations on the difference of the SSI identity model. That switches to something that is credential centric and relies on a stack of cryptography. But SSI has a lot of advantages, and so it makes sense that existing OpenID customers want to start to build bridges to this new world, and we are seeing this actively at IIW. Evernym is seeing it as a company. I'm seeing it across the industry. So what we saw was first, there are 2 basic approaches to how this can be done. I'm calling the first one bridging, which is to literally have an agent, what we call an agent that speaks SSI on one side and OpenID on the other. And in June, the British Columbia government, that's John Jordan in the center of this picture that heads that team, issued an RFP to integrate SSI with Keycloak, the identity access management system that's Red Hat puts out, and that they use at BC Gov with OpenShift. And Matter, the team from New Zealand, won that award and developed this solution. It uses an Aries Cloud agent that, as I said, translates between DIDComm and VCX, verifiable credential exchange. On one side, talks to an SSI wallet, and then translates those credentials after validating them and into OIDC, so that the systems that speak OpenID don't have to do anything different. And this was demonstrated by Tobias Loka, the Matter CTO, in this session here. It was the very first session of the first day, and just started the tone of this new marriage between OpenID and SSI. The next morning, we had a session on the other solution referred to as SIOP. That's the OpenID self-issued OpenID provider. It's a profile of OpenID that is part of the official OpenID specs. It's when you yourself, as an individual, act as the OpenID provider. This is a capability that can be built into SSI wallets. It's rather than put an agent in the middle, it actually turns your phone, your tablet, your PC into an SSI. It enables your SSI wallet to act as a self-issued OpenID provider. A specification for this has been written by the DIDOff working group at DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And that was what was shown was Evernym and Microsoft showed the implementation that we collaborated on for a UK medical project that involves a number of major institutions in the UK. And both of us had slightly different implementations, but they interoperated. And we also talked about the places where we differed a little bit from the diff spec, but it was a very engaging session that really went quite deep into the details. So lots of discussion ensued about the relationship of the two, and I'm quite optimistic that we'll see OpenID installations that will start to add SSI capabilities and evolve into this new world. Okay, number 3, there was clearly an explosion of SSI products and services, and this was not never clearer than in what we call demo day, which is on Wednesday after lunch. There's a 90-minute session of demos given, typically it was like 18 or 20. This one, it expanded to 25 because there were so many folks that wanted to give demos of their products and services. 14 of these were new SSI products and services. 8 of them were independent implementations of SSI wallets, also called DID wallets. And 5 of them involved know your customer solutions for banking financial services. I included a list here just so you'd have it of all 25 because there was no way I could get to all 25. I went to as many as I could and snapped pictures just to share with you, to give you a sense of just how much was going on here. So quickly, this is, I think, right near the start, and you can just see how folks are going around in 5-minute demo sessions from table to table. This is Margot Johnson of Transmute, cool new company out of Austin, Texas, showing their Transmute ID platform for enterprise credentials. Then Workday was there showing Workday credentials. It's not, I don't think, fully announced yet, but it's coming in a couple of weeks. It's an entire platform for, as you can see right here on the screen, issuing, holding, and verifying credentials, and not just workplace or employment credentials, but everything is out there. Sorry about that. I thought I turned off all notifications, so if you see something pop up, just ignore it. All right, so there were the Sovrin Incubator just started up last month, and all 5 startups from the incubator were there. 3 of them gave demos. This is a wonderful new company called Spaceman ID, and you can see that's the CEO and our nominee for the coolest T-shirt right there in the center. Then we have another Street Cred ID is another new SSI wallet company, and their demo was to give you download the app, get the wallet, issue a verifiable business card, and have you form a connection with it in less than 5 minutes. And I did it. I did it in about 3.5 minutes. So let's keep going here. We had Isatis AG from Germany. They are a sovereign steward. They have developed a platform called Self that specializes in integrating SSI with legacy identity and access management systems. Their security company has a number of customers that use SAML and OpenID based systems, and they wanted to show how you can use SSI wallet and verifiable credentials with those systems and integrate it pretty seamlessly. So at lots of talk. They were also demonstrated this at the My Data conference, which was the week before IIW in Helsinki. I was there, and this whole team was there showing off this. They did a lengthy demonstration there. A lot of interest in this kind of integration with IAM. Another company, ID Ramp, also is the whole company is focused on using SSI with existing enterprise infrastructure. They had a great demo. And then this is Veridium CTO Jack Callahan was there showing how we can actually have privacy respecting self-sovereign biometrics. And Jack's done a lot of work on this. There's a ITF a spec out for it, and now a diff working on integrating this. Evernym was showing how you could use these credentials directly with a self-sovereign identity wallet. And lastly, not all the demos were SSI. They were showing a number of other innovative technologies in internet identity. David Keltz of IDEMIA, for instance, here was showing how to share an ISO standard mobile driver's license and over Bluetooth and NFC and Wi-Fi and a number of configurations. And he was very proactive with me, saying, and we want to move towards also supporting SSI and the emerging standards that we're going to be talking about in a minute. So it's just a question of time. That's one of the reasons he was there at the conference. All right, so my next highlight, DIDs were, a major, DIDs were everywhere in the last IIW, but this time folks were remarking it was almost like they were just baked in. That they were just being taken as a given in all of these different demonstrations and discussions. Now, I think that's a good sign as to the growing maturity. The other sign we can hold out is that, as folks may have seen in the last webinar I did a couple of weeks ago with Marcus Sabadello, we covered the formation of the official DID working group at the W3C, and the first meeting at TPAC in Fukuoka, Japan. And it was an excellent meeting. There's a huge amount of momentum. A number of companies have officially now joined and become part of the effort, including Microsoft. I just was talking with IBM about their effort there. Most of the companies you're seeing in this overview are all participating in that. At those meetings, we covered that there are now 4 major categories of DIDs. There are over 32 methods that are listed in the unofficial DID registry DID method registry maintained by the Credentials Community Group at W3C. And they fall into these 4 major categories: ledger-based and peer-based and layer 2 and alternative, which we covered in that last SSI Meetup webinar. And it was great to see that all 4 of these types of DIDs were present throughout IIW. And there's an increasing understanding and sense of how they're all going to work together. That it's not about any one DID method working, it's about DID methods working for whoever needs them, that they are the root of trust that you need if you're using it on a public ledger, or they are the way that you establish pure trust, and they all work. They're just, it's like different tools in the toolbox for building the house of trust that we're trying to build together. So the only session and I may have missed one, but I think the only specific session on DID method was held by Dave Huseby. Actually, he held it twice. One to provide feedback on the DID spec, and the second one to talk about where the DID get method is going. At the last IIW last spring, he and a number of folks worked throughout IIW on the DID get method. So he was coming back and reporting on the work that had gone on over the summer. A set of interns at Hyperledger were implementing this. His goal for the DID get method is to have it integrated all the way into ultimately to the Git code base, and for have it become a worldwide standard for signing code contributions. And he's a long ways down that. This was a really interesting and session on the nitty-gritties of a method that is, not ledger-based, but treats Git repositories like a globally distributed ledger. If you're interested in that, Dave Huseby at the Linux Foundation is easy to find and get in touch with, and he wants anyone who wants to contribute there to do just that. And feel free to contact myself or Alex if you're having trouble connecting up there. Okay, so DIDs lead to DIDComm, And we're going to talk about the whole stack here in a minute, but I just want to make it clear this was the centerpiece conversation that really happened. DIDComm is the core interop protocol that we've been converging on for all of SSI, how agents and wallets, and ideally also hubs, data hubs can communicate in a common way, very much like HTTP works and HTTPS works for browsers and web servers. It is a common way for how connections can be formed, regardless of what DID method is used for a particular verifiable credential that you might exchange. In order to form a connection and actually start to have that exchange, it's proposed that the DID peer method, that's the default that's built into DIDComm, is how you form a connection. And then it becomes the base protocol for verifiable credential exchange, even across the multiple verifiable credential formats. Now, that's not a done deal yet. There's a lot of work that's still going on to do that. But to do that work, the wonderful Sam Curran, who's been helping facilitate this work at Hyperledger Ares for the Sovrin Foundation. Also, he's on the DIF, Decentralized Identity Foundation Steering Council. He's been one of the key folks basically bringing those two communities together to arrive at this common standard for DIDComm. So when he called his first session, it was packed, and it had some, almost all the key contributors that were IIW were there. And I'm going to point out this one little white-haired person right back there. That's Kim Cameron, who recently retired from Microsoft as the chief identity architect, is now a free agent, and he decided he wanted to be here at IIW for this day and to come to this session, and towards the end volunteered that he wants to be directly involved in the development of the DIDComm protocol because he sees how critical it is to the future of SSI and an internet scale identity meta system. So everyone left this first session going, this is really happening. In fact, we need another session, which Sam held the next day, and that was even larger and got even deeper into the issues. And a key thing got discussed, which is how DIDComm as a spec can be incubated without any IPR concerns, so that it eventually can go to an SDO, a standards development organization. The one people are discussing here for DIDComm is IETF as a protocol. It's a natural home for that. But in order to take something cleanly to an SDO like IETF, you want to make sure that all the contributors are signing a contribution agreement, making sure there's no intellectual property rights issues. That whole conversation coming out of these sessions is being driven forward between Hyperledger and the Hyperledger Ares project and the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And it's moving very nicely. And so I won't say anything further here because those conversations are going on, but stay tuned because I think once this, if it does come together the way we were discussing there, it's going to be worthy of a whole nother SSI Meetup webinar just about DIDComm and how it's going to be proceeding as a set of RFCs. So that's the DIDComm story. Now, a lot of folks are aware that verifiable credentials is hopefully within about 30 days of being an official verifiable credentials data model 1.0, an official W3C recommendation. It's currently a proposed recommendation. But folks may not be aware, there are actually three different credential formats or three different credential signature formats that are in that 1.0 spec. And the news here is simply that all three are very active and going forward very quickly. Linked data signatures is the one that's being pursued primarily by Digital Bazaar and their ecosystem. JSON Web Tokens, based on the Jose stack, has a bunch of folks that are implementing that. And then zero knowledge proofs that provide particularly powerful selective disclosure capabilities. That was originally implemented in Hyperledger Indy. It's now moved moving into Aries, and is also has a lot of adoption and interest. So I think the good news is that in the stack that we're going to talk about in a minute, all of these are planned to be, support will be there for all of them. So we won't have to necessarily choose, a little bit like did methods, you'll be able to choose what works. And ideally we'll have wallets and agents and exchange protocols that can handle all three. So that's the verifiable credentials update. Now, I think from my perspective, the biggest thing coming out of this, in addition to the to sort of the convergence throughout DIDComm, is we're converging on an overall interoperability stack. If we want interoperability across the ecosystem, if we want SSI wallets and agents to be able to work with different DID methods, with different credential formats, but for you to be able to move from one wallet to another, from one agent to another, that is going to require interoperability that we can all agree on. And I think we're taking major steps forward to that. Now, the stack I'm about to show is one that you've seen before, but there's a twist, and this is what we presented. John Jordan and I presented this together with Chris Buchanan from MITRE. And so I'm going to run you through it here just so you can see, I'll do it fairly quickly, but you can see how mature this thinking is getting and why I'm optimistic that we're going to get to real interop. So the first layer is DID's public DID networks and DID methods, also called DID registries in the spec. And I want to emphasize here, this is a network of networks. This is all the DID methods that are being developed out there, whether it's permissionless networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, public permission networks like Sovrin, SSI specific ones like Verus1, the layer 2 methods like Ion and Element. All of these can fit together at layer 1. The whole point is that as long as they're compatible with the DID specification, all of those can support the higher layers, and it can simply become a matter of choosing the method that works for you, particularly as an issuer of credentials. So that's how I think we're going to get to full interoperability at layer 1. Now, layer 2 is, the whole idea is that's cross-ledger. It's ledger independent. It is all about how agents and wallets can form connections and communicate and interoperate with all the DID methods and with all the credential formats. And this is why DIDComm is the heart of it from a protocol stack standpoint. That you call it the thin waist, very much like IP is the thin waist of the internet protocol stack. So, and the default for DIDComm performing connections is, again, pure DIDs and the pure DID method. So that's why DIDComm is the heart of the conversation right now. Now, again, there's a couple different projects that have been working on this. Hyperledger Aries was formed to really make sure that that was happening. Diff and their interop project has been very active. Digital Bazaar has also been working on their own approach to this layer. And so this is where the convergence really is happening. And again, stay tuned for news on that. So together, those two form the cryptographic trust layer, right? At this layer, two agents and wallets can connect and form a connection just like two devices form a TCP/IP connection. And you don't have anything more than cryptographic trust in who you're dealing with at the other end. And to address that, that's the whole point of the two higher layers. And that next layer is, of course, verifiable credentials, what we call the trust triangle of issuers that issue credentials to holders that then, when verifiers need proofs of those credentials, also called presentations of the credentials as a proof to the verifiers. And the verifiers are able to use the issuers, a signature that the issuer is provided with a public DID to verify that credential. And then also revocation often uses a DID network as well. So, but the most important thing is in this trust triangle, verifiers do not need a direct connection with issuers. It's true that the verifier needs to have a trust relationship. A credential doesn't mean anything if the verifier doesn't trust the issuer. But the verifiers do not have to have any direct relationship with the issuer. All they need to know is how to accept and validate a proof of a credential and decide who they trust. And again, the standard there, the 1.0 standard is what we've just talked about at W3C. So that's actually the layer that's furthest advanced in terms of standardization. Now, that question of who do you trust brings us to layer 4, governance frameworks. And which is any governance authority that publishes a governance framework that basically says, here are the policies that apply to issuing, holding, or verifying a credential. Here are how some governance authority determines who are the trusted issuers. There are many examples of these out there. I've given, I've covered this almost every SSI Meetup webinar that I've given. The different examples, credit card networks are a good example, and they could move to this model fairly easily because they already are governance authorities for who are the authorized issuers on their networks. An SSI specific example is CU Ledger, the consortium formed by the credit union industry that is already in the process of developing the governance framework, and they will actually be issuing credentials to credit unions so that verifiers are going to be able to prove not only is an individual a member of a credit union, but that credit union is an authoritative, a valid credit union because they will have a credential from CU Ledger up here. So the whole idea of governance frameworks is they allow you to scale the networks of trust that use the verifiable credentials trust triangle. Now, let me get to the twist on this. Again, none of this has changed from earlier presentations of the stack, but what John Jordan and I presented in the final session of the second day was an answer to this question, which we are getting more frequently. Doesn't that governance actually apply at each layer of the stack? And the answer is yes, which is why John coined this term, the trust over IP stack. And what you'll see here is this is the exact same stack we were just looking at. We've just emphasized that there's technology involved from top to bottom here. Even governance frameworks, actually, the way they're published and verified is part of a technical stack. But there's a parallel governance stack, which says governance frameworks actually apply at every level here. You've got governance at a network level, whether it's obviously for permission networks or public permission networks like Sovrin, that's a good example, but even permissionless networks have governance. It's just algorithmic, and they could publish, for example, they can still have governance authorities, or they can have groups of developers that publish what those algorithms are, and trust decisions can be made on that basis. So, no matter how it's done, you still have governance at the network level. Then it's becoming clear we're going to need governance frameworks at layer 2. How can you trust a particular agent and the hardware that it runs on and the wallet that it's using? And if there's a hub involved, how can you trust those things? Is there certification available of some kind for the hardware, for the software, for an agent running an agency in the cloud? That's definitely, it's not that all implementations are going to need that, but we're already hearing from some potential adopters like governments asking, where are those governance frameworks going to come from? Now, layer 3 is the obvious place, credential governance frameworks. This is the majority of what the Sovrin Foundation has called domain-specific governance frameworks. Every credential that verifiers are going to need to, that they don't issue themselves, but they need to rely on, is going to need a credential governance framework. So that's where I think we'll see the largest you know, over time, thousands, tens of thousands of credential governance frameworks will be out there. And at the very top level, you have what we call meta-system governance frameworks. And this is really, if you look at the sovereign governance framework, and I do have a perspective as the now the co-chair of that working group. I've been joined by Emily Fry of Matter as the other co-chair. And the work we've done in the last 3 years, the sovereign governance framework is really a combination of a network governance framework and a meta-system governance framework. And the evolution of this stack has led us to a point of now realizing we need to evolve what we're calling Sovereign Governance Framework v3 that will separate out those things and will have a proper meta-system governance framework, and the sovereign network will be just one network in this network of networks. And that was the final message coming out of our session, that we think it's an inevitable evolution point for the Sovrin Foundation to move to a network of networks model based on a shared meta-system governance framework. And we're already discussing that at the Sovereign Governance Framework Working Group. If you're interested, by all means, contact me through SSI Meetup or the Sovrin Foundation, and we can discuss that. We just had a call on that on our meeting on Monday. And we will be working very closely with Hyperledger and the Decentralized Identity Foundation as we converge around an overall meta-system model. And so I have one more. I'm just quickly checking the time. I think we're doing okay. My last conclusion, my last highlight is, I think, in some ways, maybe even the most important one, which is convergence on terminology. The very last session that we held on Thursday, the last day, was a session on terminology, not because it was a huge issue, but because we realized that as we're moving out into the market, using common terms is becoming increasingly important. Obviously, we need them to interop on our own products and services, but we need to be able to talk to the market about, the tools and the experience and the controls in an SSI universe in a common way. Interestingly enough, the same day, it was the first time that there was a gathering of the product managers that were at IIW. I don't recall a session called just by the product managers before, and there were a good 25 people in that session. I was not able to go, but I heard later that they were just like discovering each other, and just a huge surge of energy about the common problems that they face in designing and common and successful user experiences for SSI wallets and agents and credential exchange. And one of the areas they focused, or they said is a real pain point they need to work on, is terminology. And so they volunteered to be part of this glossary work. It was a great discussion. In fact, we ran out of time to even finish this. So we ran into the very unusual situation that only one person could turn around and call another session after it had the closing circle, which is the end of the conference. And that's what Kalia Identity Woman did. And so we actually went back into session after this. There were at least a dozen of us that went and had another half an hour of discussing how are we specifically going to proceed with a common glossary. And the conclusion there was a new glossary project that will be under the DIF, Decentralized Identity Foundation umbrella. And the glossary will actually move from what the Sovereign Glossary has been maintaining is a Google Doc where every term is linkable, but actually move into a GitHub repo where you can watch the evolution. We can take issues and pull requests, and the entire community can be contributing to hopefully what becomes rock solid terminology for the whole space. And that was a really, I think, a lot of folks felt like that's another good sign of maturity that we're getting to in the industry. So I think that's my 8 highlights. Hopefully there are probably a pile of questions, and Alex, let's just dive into them.
Yeah, we have no questions so far. I think that you have been overwhelming everyone with all this information. But just quick question for me, and maybe to give time to if anyone wants to bring up a question meanwhile. how do you see progress on bringing this to market? I mean, what were the highlights or like the main messages you were seeing at IIW, like taking the pulse of, okay, when do we see the next or the first products coming out that have some of these SSI elements into them?
So as I highlighted with the explosion of demonstrations, a number of those were commercial products that are either in market or about to be in market. I mean, for example, Workday is planning on launching their platform, I believe, at a conference that they have later this month. A number of the wallets that I said were demonstrated are already in the App Store, at the Apple App Store or Google Play. I know Evernym's is, I know that StreetCred is, I believe Matters is, and I know I'm going to be missing some, but as I said, of the 8 wallets, I think the majority of them are actually in the app stores now, and so there's a real sense that the commercialization is already underway. And one of the keys is integration of SSI with existing identity and access management systems. So what's being tackled now as we iron out the stack is, as the advantages become clear, how are these products and services going to be used with existing infrastructure? I mean, identity is not a new problem. It's arguably the oldest problem of the internet as a whole. And therefore, solutions already exist in many markets, inside many companies, inside, consortia and governments and everything else. So a lot of the work is going to be, how do these new pieces fit? Where do they go first? What are the problems that get solved first with the biggest pain points? And I think we're making a lot of progress. I know my day job at Evernym, we're talking to over 50 customers now that have some aspect of those pain points, everywhere from specific companies all the way to global networks. So and the answer in each case may be different. What their pain point is, where they first want to use credentials, why they want to use them, the problem they're solving. It's a little bit like, sometimes I give the analogy, I often give the analogy of the web. Once we had web browsers and web servers, what websites got developed depended entirely on, what was the information sharing problem that needed to be solved. And yeah, 30 years later, we can look back and see, or I guess 20 years, what happened, and we can classify. Oh, there's all kinds of, there are e-commerce sites, and there's auction sites, and there's directories and search engines and everything else. I think we're going to look at a similar maturity here, but the early pain points depend on the customers that are coming to the table.
Great. I have a couple of questions that came up here. Meanwhile, Timothy, he's asking, what is the biggest, most promising use case to come out of IIW?
Biggest and most promising use case. Well, I would say that passwordless authentication and the ability to use an SSI wallet and credentials to do that it's always been one of the most obvious benefits. The market pressure to deliver it and to be able to again marry it up to systems like backend systems that already accept things like OpenID. That was clearly something that everyone was seeing as all right, this is ready to come to market. That's a clear win. If you go a step beyond that, because arguably that doesn't actually require any, it's only takes you up to layer 2. You don't actually have to get to credential exchange to just do passwordless authentication. With credentials, I would say that kinds of cross-domain information sharing that have been very difficult to do are the lowest hanging pain points. As I said, there were 5 demonstrations of KYC, Know Your Customer, which is a classic example of that. I think those kinds of cross-domain credentials that, again, are very painful today to try and do via the ordinary web and are one-click simple once the credentials are issued. Once you have that, that's where we'll see the initial uptake. What exactly the breakthrough use cases are for that, though, does depend on the industry. In healthcare, for example, I'm seeing it at two ends of the spectrum. One is credentialing of doctors and nurses and just the pain point around that, such as in the UK with NHS, how much overhead's involved. But at the other end of the spectrum, it can be just digital transformation of insurance cards and eliminating overhead in the registration and payment for visiting your doctor. Long before we get to portable medical records, it's just dealing with cutting out the overhead of the paperwork.
Awesome. Jamie is asking two questions here. He's asking, is the glossary, which sounds cool, system agnostic? And then he's saying, example, using Hyperledger versus Ethereum, Sovrin versus some other trust network. And then he's also asking, do DIDs hold it under neutral open license, safe for everyone to play? And those are the two questions.
Yeah, those are both questions. So I'll take a second here to, I want to go back to this one slide as I answer that question. So first, with the glossary, absolutely our goal is that it works for all of SSI. So it would be, the way I would put it is we want to have common terms for everything that is in fact common across this whole stack. That's why I wanted to bring the stack back up. I mean, a good example is look at all the terms on this one slide. What we would like is for everyone, and I'm not saying these are the terms, these are the terms we're currently using. This is currently being turned into a Hyperledger Ares RFC, which might soon be a diff RFC, RFC being a request for comment or a way of talking about a SPAC. But all of these would be terms that we would submit to the glossary to say, can we have common terms? For instance, on the technology stack, the terms, for example, that you see here at layer 3, these are terms from the W3C verifiable credentials data model specification, right? And in fact, even the term proof, there's another term, presentation, that is used up here, which has, all those have technical definitions. So we want to make sure the glossary is very clear wherever it needs to be technical. But what the product team, coming out of the product meeting was, a lot of these terms are too technical for the general market. And what would help the whole industry is for us to decide what are the terms that we're going to be using from a product side, from a marketing side, to describe these. If we're able to talk in common terms, for instance, if you think about as the web grew up, the term browser started to be used uniformly. The term web server and website and login and all those terms started to have common meaning that helped the whole industry grow. So I think we need convergence on technical terms and to identify when is it common, when is there a term that is specific to a particular technology. That's okay. That term can be in there, but it needs to be understood. That term only applies, for instance, to zero-knowledge crypto credentials, or only to linked data-based credentials. So we need all that. We're talking about tagging terms in the glossary so that you could actually see quickly a subset of, okay, these are we could call it market-facing terms. These are technical terms. These are terms used by a specific community, but they're all together in the same glossary so that we can drive as much convergence as possible. That's sort of a long answer to a very, very important question. And now I forgot the second question, Alex.
Yeah, second one was, do DIDs hold it under neutral open license?
All right, so let me clarify. That's another reason I want to come to this. So DIDs, there's these four categories of DIDs. But all of them have what we call a DID method. It's a specification that's written that says, here is the name of this DID method. For example, the first Bitcoin method is called DID:BTCR. And one of the Ethereum methods is DID:ETH. And Sovrin uses DID:SOV. Those are called DID method names. And every one of them is required to have a DID method specification. You choose the name, you define the format, the structure of the actual DID identifier, and you define what we call the 4 CRUD operations: create, read, update, and deactivate the DID. So those have to be specific. You have to have a specification. I don't know of a DID method today where that specification is not public and available to anyone to use, because otherwise you're going to be competing against a sea of open public methods. And there may be some proprietary or specialized DID methods that are not open public specifications that anyone could use, but I just don't know how far they're going to get in the market. So when you talk about DIDs, you're talking about a DID method. Now, there are other methods that are not based on ledgers, like the pure DID method that operates at this layer. That's already an open public specification. It's an RFC at Hyperledger Aries. I don't have if someone has it in the chat, they can put a link in there, but you can also just search Hyperledger Aries pure DID spec, and I think you'll get it. So that's an example one that it's not on the ledgers. It is currently, it's an open public specification. It's registered at W3C in the DID method registry, and all the methods there, I believe all 32, are open public specifications. So I don't think any of them would have any IPR encumbrances, if that's what the question was about.
No, great. I know you have a hard stop in 7 minutes, so we have 2 more questions here, and then I think we can wrap up. Stephen is asking how to understand DID-based implementations when the DID working group charter is to be finalized not before September 2021.
Yeah, that's a good question. Just to clarify, the charter is what we needed to start the working group. The charter specifies a 2-year period, or a 2-year, a lifespan for the working group. That's to accommodate the full set of steps you have to go through to become a W3C standard, what they call a W3C recommendation. And fully 3/4 of that period is waiting periods you go through as you take advance of specifications. So we, at the meeting in Fukuoka 2 weeks ago, we agreed we're going to try to be at feature freeze on the spec in 6 months. So next spring, we expect to publish a working draft that will be what we then want to start advancing through that standardization, the rest of the standardization process. So first of all, I'd say, a lot of work, at this point, 3.5 years of work have gone into what we call the community final draft at the credentials community group at W3C. That was formally submitted and accepted to the full DID working group in Fukuoka, and it's pretty mature. Now, they're likely, they're going to be, I think, relatively small changes, but if you're a developer worried about how stable it is, I would say you don't have that much to be worried about. I can't make any promises there because, I'm just one editor on the spec, but I think that's the general sense of it. But if you are concerned about, you really want to make sure it's as hardened as possible. You don't have to wait very long because we just were on a call this morning and it's going to move pretty fast. B, you can actually track the issues there. You don't have to be a member of W3C to join the mailing list or monitor or even submit issues on the spec. So you can see exactly what's being debated, what has a likelihood of changing. And like I said, they're going to be fairly small. And C, worst case, in 6 months, you're going to see something that I think is going to be highly stable. So I wouldn't really have concerns as a developer about, that changing that much.
Great. Last comment coming here from, unless there's no question, I think we have like 2 minutes left, but if there's no question, we have a comment here from Christopher, who did a SSI meetup with you like a couple of weeks ago, from the Seattle team. And he's just saying, thanks, Drummond. I always appreciate your insight. Will this deck be available after the session? And yes, Chris, it will be available after the session. I'll be uploading the Google slide deck, the video, and the slideshow deck under the same link of the webinar, where you have the link for the session, and so you will be able to have a look at that and also use the slides if you need to. Drummond, any final thoughts to wrap this up?
I was just, Alex, that I announced a couple times that I would be doing this highlights to make sure that anyone that I was, that I wasn't actually in their session or anything, had a chance to make sure that I would include them. The biggest thing was we just got a bunch of requests for sharing the link, because a lot of folks who come to IIW then want to, there's so much to communicate about what happened. They're like, oh, if you're going to do the highlights, then just make sure I get the link. Heidi Saul, that I pointed out there, actually requested that once you have the link, please send it to her. She will include it in the email going out that they send out about a week after the IIW. So I think we'll continue this as a regular occurrence, and it's a pleasure to do it. It helps me sort of organize my thoughts after each IIW, because I tell you, it's an amazing conference. I do want to say, if you think this is good, please come to the next one. There's no experience like actually being there and going through it. And the last thing I want to say is that if you're in New York City and you're coming to the city event tonight on the future of digital identity, that's where I'll be speaking in about an hour and a half. So I'll see you over there.
Awesome, Drummond. Thank you so much, as always, for sharing all the stuff that you're doing in the space, traveling around the world. For everyone else, as I said before, we will be uploading all this stuff online in the next 24 hours. We have blog certs coming up this Thursday, so join us there if you want to learn more about what blog certs is about and how this fits into the SSI space. And more cool stuff coming up in the coming weeks that we are organizing as we speak. If you want to follow up on all those things, please join our Telegram channel, Twitter, LinkedIn, or all these other channels we have to distribute all the sessions we do. And you will get all the material. Go to ssimeetup.org and you can download it, watch it, and hopefully use it. We have a number of requests from people around the world who want to do local SSI meetups. So we are trying to support them and find a way to do that. And we're really excited about that. And as this stuff happens, I will let know everyone about that too. Okay, so Drummond, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who had the ability to join us today.
Thank you, Alex. Always a pleasure.